They didn't just push me out. They signed a petition to erase me from the company I helped build. 23 names. Some I mentored, others I trusted. I said nothing. No meltdown, no fight. I simply walked out quietly and joined a competitor they'd laughed at for years. What happened next flipped the industry, buried their reputation, and forced them to come crawling back. But by then, I wasn't theirs to reclaim. If you've ever been shut out by the very people you helped, this story is for you. Subscribe and share your story in the comments. I'm listening. There's a silence that doesn't come from peace, but from betrayal. So complete it turns an open office into a battlefield. I didn't hear footsteps. I didn't hear voices, just the low hum of ambition sharpening itself against my back. That's when Eric dropped the paper on my desk. He didn't look angry. He looked satisfied. That smug half smile, the kind people wear when they think they've won before the fight even begins. "You should read it," he said, loud enough for the entire floor to hear. His tone was light, conversational, but every word was a knife. I didn't ask questions. I didn't ask why. I already knew. My eyes scanned the petition. 23 signatures. Every analyst, every coordinator, even my own assistant. Not a single name missing. Except mine. The paper was still warm from the printer, and their ink hadn't even dried. I stared at it a moment longer than I should have, as if it might suddenly change its mind. Then I folded it neatly in half, placed it beside my monitor, and said, "Thank you." Eric blinked, confused. He expected outrage, or maybe tears. He didn't get either. I stood, took my water bottle, and walked to the break room. The room, once filled with murmured conversations, turned to static. I wasn't surprised. In the months leading up to this, the signs had been everywhere. Missing invites to meetings I was supposed to lead, documents altered without explanation, sudden shifts in tone whenever I entered a room. The writing was on the wall. They just decided to print it this time. I returned to my desk. The petition remained untouched. I didn't speak to anyone for the rest of the day. I didn't need to. Their message was clear. Mine would be clearer. Around 6:20 p.m., after most had gone home, I opened my project folder, not the public ones, the private one I'd been building alone since the first signs of sabotage. Inside were full assessments, predictions, and scalable frameworks for a new analytic structure. Not for them, not anymore. I transferred the files to an encrypted drive, powered down my workstation, and walked out without saying goodbye. Travis from HR called the next morning. "We need to talk about yesterday," he said, his voice overly careful. I agreed, but not in person. I emailed my resignation letter, effective immediately. No exit interview, no emotion, just facts. I copied Vanessa Lang, the CEO, on the message. She didn't reply. I didn't expect her to. She knew what they had done, and more importantly, she knew what she had allowed. They believed they'd erased me, but I wasn't erased. I just went silent. They were celebrating a win they didn't understand. That was their first mistake. Their second would be thinking I disappeared. I didn't go back. I went in a different direction. You never see the knife coming when you're too busy handing out the blueprint for your enemy's success. I wasn't just part of the system. They had built half of it using my models, my strategies, and my silence. And still, they signed their names to cut me out. Before they decided I was the problem, I was the golden investment. 2 years earlier, Connor Briggs had walked into my office with a laminated smile and an offer I couldn't refuse. "We need someone who can modernize the entire client performance structure," he said. "And frankly, Mia, no one reads data like you do." He wasn't wrong. I had already streamlined 3 chaotic systems in 2 other branches. People weren't just noticing, they were copying. I didn't come from a pedigree, they knew that. I came from grit. I came from mistakes made in underfunded labs and long nights cleaning corrupted data sets until they told the truth. At the time, this company, the old one, felt like a step forward. They sold it to me like a promotion, but it was a cleanup mission. The analytics division was bloated, self congratulatory, and bleeding clients while pretending the chart still meant something. I stepped in with quiet precision. No big speeches, just a rotating cycle of audits, interviews, client feedback loops, and metrics redesign. Within months, we saw micro shifts, higher engagement, fewer blind spots, cleaner data quality. I wasn't flashy, I was effective. But the closer I got to the rot, the more I noticed who was invested in keeping it there. Eric Dalton, the self proclaimed systems architect, was the loudest. "We've used this structure for years," he said in our first real meeting, leaning back like he owned the damn floor. "Changing it might destabilize everything." What he meant was changing it might show he'd been wrong. But I didn't say that. I let the numbers speak. I showed projections, outcome ratios, and case studies from companies already outpacing us. He smiled through gritted teeth. That was the beginning. At first, it was passive resistance, delays, missing attachments, meetings mysteriously moved without notice. Then came the quiet exclusions, the rewrites to my shared documentation, the sudden narrative that I moved too fast. They never said it to my face, but the tone shifted like a tide. And the higher the metrics climbed, the quieter my own name got during executive reviews. I became the invisible engine, useful, disposable. Connor stopped defending me after the second quarter. "It's just politics, Mia," he said when I raised concerns about project credits being reassigned. "You're doing great work and people notice, but sometimes it's better not to rock the boat." That boat, I soon realized, was already sinking. I started documenting everything, not because I thought HR would help, but because I knew I'd need the record. I knew a story was being written without me, and I wasn't going to let them finish it first. I didn't know what the betrayal would look like yet, but I knew it was coming, not because of paranoia, because of patterns. And the patterns were clear. They wanted the results, not the person creating them. They wanted to profit off my silence while slowly pushing me out. What they didn't know, what they couldn't predict, was that I had already started building a different foundation, one that didn't require their approval, one that didn't depend on recognition. The storm hadn't started yet, but I had already packed my umbrella. Sometimes the people who truly see your worth aren't offering you a title. They're offering you freedom. I didn't leave because I was broken. I left because someone else finally asked me what I could build without the weight of everyone else's denial. The email came 3 weeks before the petition. At the time, it seemed harmless. A short message from Nia Chin, the founder of a startup I had vaguely heard of, but never seriously considered. "We're rethinking predictive systems in fintech," she wrote. "Someone on our board flagged your older work from the Wilcox account. Any chance you're open to a conversation?" I didn't respond right away. I was still, back then, foolishly loyal to the very walls that were closing in. But I saved the email. That's the thing about people like me. We don't burn things down in a fury. We store the matchbook quietly, just in case. When the petition arrived and my resignation was sent, I didn't update my LinkedIn. I didn't post some poetic farewell. I just forwarded Nia's email back with one line, "Still interested." The reply came in 5 minutes. "Fly down. My team will clear time. Full NDA. No pressure." I booked the flight to Austin 2 days later, wearing jeans and a hoodie to the terminal, because for the first time in months, I didn't need to perform competence. I could just be. I landed to a handshake, real coffee, and whiteboards covered in real problems. Not posturing, not bureaucracy, just open questions waiting for smart answers. Their headquarters was inside a former industrial building, now renovated into a workspace that didn't reek of artificial culture. No ping pong tables, no forced team building posters, just silence, structure, and screens. They were small, barely 30 employees, but their tech was nimble and brilliant. They weren't trying to look like disruptors, they were trying to be better. And Nia wasn't like Vanessa Lang. She didn't sit behind glass or nod vaguely during rehearsed reviews. She looked me in the eye and said, "You've been building someone else's empire. What would happen if you built your own inside ours?" I didn't answer her right away. I asked for time to study their existing systems, their client flow, their weaknesses. She agreed. I spent the next 3 days reading every internal memo, parsing out the holes in their machine, mapping them against the exact knowledge I had once offered my former employer. My conclusion? Their system was lean, hungry, and two key structures away from domination. One of them I had already designed 6 months ago. It had been ignored by Connor. Eric had laughed it off. Here, they printed it and built a beta prototype within 48 hours. They didn't just listen, they moved. That's what made me say yes. I didn't ask for a C-suite title. I didn't negotiate salary over wine. I asked for access, autonomy, and one condition. My role stays silent for now. I wanted to work under a different name internally. No public title, no welcome post. I wasn't hiding. I was hunting. No one at my old company would suspect I was behind the firm, quietly stealing their clients and rewriting the rulebook. While they sat in glass rooms arguing over team morale, I was downstairs in a concrete lab rewriting algorithms to fix the very gaps they had ignored. Tamika Rhodes joined 2 weeks later. She had been one of the few at the old firm who didn't sign the petition. Someone who had whispered truths in break rooms and stayed late not for favor, but for pride in the work. "You're here?" she asked when I stepped into the Austin office kitchen. I nodded. "So are you." We didn't speak of the past. We didn't need to. We were already building the future. And this time, I wasn't going to let anyone else write the ending. Some blueprints aren't drawn in ink, they're written in scars. Every betrayal, every silence, every closed door meeting I wasn't invited to, it became architecture. By the time they realized I'd left, I'd already built the first floor of the empire that would quietly bury theirs. The blueprint didn't begin as a plan for revenge, it began as a map to freedom. The first 2 weeks at Nia's company weren't about attacking my old firm. They were about examining the bones of what they built wrong. Mia Carter didn't need to torch the building. She only needed to build better and wait for gravity to do the rest. What I brought to Austin wasn't just ambition. It was insider knowledge. But I wasn't reckless. I created silos, compartmentalized information, and ensured nothing I used breached proprietary lines. I didn't need to steal. I remembered everything worth redoing. My old firm had obsessed over predictive cash flow tools for mid-market banks, but had always cut corners on human-centric design. The data was rich, the interface obsolete. I had proposed a dynamic insight layer, real-time behavioral markers that could flag fraud and user drop-offs before they escalated. Eric Dalton called it vanity code. Connor Briggs ignored it completely. But Nia's team? They said, "When can we test it?" I didn't just code, I architected. I broke down the pillars of their outdated model: data hoarding, fear-based decision-making, performance metrics built on legacy clients. Then I reverse engineered the values I wanted instead. Transparency, speed, modular design, a feedback loop that trusted analysts over managers. In 21 days, I led the first launch of our real-time fraud alerting tool. Jasmine Lin, who'd once hesitated to question the corporate chain of command, was now leading our UI refinements and lighting up the whiteboard like a wildfire. Her fear had turned into focus. Tamika had rebuilt our sales deck from scratch, translating raw power into something banks couldn't say no to. We didn't need slogans, we had results. But I knew better than to be loud. Mia Carter was invisible. Emails went out under team aliases. Calls were conducted by product heads. I was the architect in the walls. Untitled, unseen, essential. By the end of month 1, we landed a contract with Brava Bank, the exact institution my former company had pitched for a year and still couldn't close. They didn't even realize who had taken the deal. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just survival anymore. It was a takedown without a headline. One by one, I watched from the shadows as our system outperformed theirs. Cleaner, faster, more adaptive. I could anticipate how they'd try to react. That's the advantage of having been on the inside. I knew the ego traps, the technical depths they'd never admit, the ways Eric would try to brute force innovation through committees. And all I had to do was keep building. But I didn't want war. I wanted eclipse. The kind of revenge where no one screams because they're too busy being confused by their own decline. I documented everything, not out of fear of lawsuits, but as a discipline. Every line of code I wrote had a reason. Every feature shipped had a logic trail. If the day ever came that they tried to fight what I'd created, I could lay out the entire strategy without flinching. This wasn't theft. It was evolution. And evolution doesn't need permission. I wasn't building to prove them wrong anymore. I was building so I'd never need their version of right again. The blueprint was clear now. Not a line for revenge, but a grid of resilience. And at the center of it all, a silent promise. I'd never let another committee decide whether I deserved to lead. They didn't see it coming because they never imagined I was capable of walking away, much less building something stronger. But what shattered them wasn't my absence, it was watching their crown client sign a deal with a ghost they thought they'd buried. It happened on a Tuesday, quiet and forgettable to them, but not to us. For weeks, we'd been polishing every corner of our offering, preparing to enter a blind pitch process for Reborn Trust, a national banking consortium my former company had chased for over a year. They were close, I'll give them that. Eric Dalton had built entire roadmaps around closing this deal. Connor Briggs had used it as leverage to stall promotions. They needed Reborn Trust the way a sinking ship needs air, and we took it from them. Quietly, cleanly, without ever naming names. Tamika and Jasmine led the demo. Our product didn't just solve Reborn's problems, it anticipated them. Everything my old firm had failed to streamline, we reimagined. Faster onboarding, transparent risk reporting, customizable fraud flags with adaptive learning curves. Our system spoke their language before they asked the question. Within 2 weeks, we signed a 3-year contract. When the press release dropped, the emails started rolling in. I didn't respond to any of them. Not from Nick Harmon, who suddenly remembered how talented I was. Not from Travis Nolan in HR, who worded his message like we were old friends catching up. And especially not from Connor, who didn't write, but had the intern I trained reach out on his behalf. That was the first blow, not the win. The silence. The awareness deep in their bones that I had become untouchable and that I had never needed to shout to strike. I watched the aftermath like a scientist. Internally, they would scramble for answers, rewrite timelines, assign blame. I imagined Eric pacing, blaming the pitch team, questioning why his roadmap wasn't followed. I could picture Travis throwing out words like realignment and restructure, all while refusing to admit that the problem wasn't execution, it was culture. The culture that fed on resentment and overlooked the people who actually built things. Mia Carter had been invisible long enough. Now her work did the speaking. But this wasn't about gloating. This was a test. Would they learn? Would they evolve? Or would they double down, convinced the loss was external sabotage instead of internal rot? I already knew the answer. 2 days later, they rolled out a retention initiative, offering bonuses to mid-level talent. Nick Harmon forwarded me the internal memo. Without shame. Crazy timing, he wrote. Would love to catch up. That was when I knew how deep their desperation went. The old firm was hemorrhaging morale, losing control of the narrative, and still didn't understand how it had happened. I didn't have to scream, "You were wrong." The contract did it for me. The first blow wasn't about money or victory, it was about clarity. It was the moment the hierarchy snapped. When the people who buried me under silence were forced to read my signature on a contract they couldn't touch. I didn't dance. I didn't tweet. I documented. I built the next feature. I refined the next pitch. Because in the world I was creating, one win wasn't enough. I wasn't playing to settle a score. I was playing to rewrite the rules they had sworn would never change. And that was only the beginning. You know the sound a building makes right before it collapses? It's not thunder, it's whispering. Soft, frantic voices echoing in glass rooms as people realize the foundation's rotting and there's no way to stop what's coming. That's what started happening at my old firm, and I didn't even have to touch them. After the Orban Trust contract went public, the ripple was immediate. Not loud, not dramatic, just a shift in the air, like watching the tide retreat before a tsunami. From what I gathered, Connor Briggs called an all-hands meeting within 48 hours. He spoke in neutral, sanitized phrases, repositioning, unexpected outcomes, strategic reset. But the team wasn't buying it. They were smart, even if the leadership never treated them like it. And in those little moments of uncertainty, people started connecting the dots. Jasmine told me later that a senior engineer quit mid-meeting, walked out, no words, just gone. Others followed because this wasn't just about losing a client, it was about losing faith. About realizing that the woman they pushed out had gone silent not because she was defeated, but because she was preparing something they couldn't see coming. One former colleague messaged me in the middle of the night, just a screenshot, an internal Slack thread where someone asked, "Did anyone ever figure out why Mia really left?" No answers, just reactions. Eyes, flames, question marks. The kind of things people use when they're afraid to speak plainly. Tamika and I watched from a distance. We didn't gloat, we analyzed. We used the momentum to fast track 2 more proposals, both targeting clients I'd once been kept away from to preserve optics. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd excluded me from high-value pitches. Now I was winning them. Meanwhile, inside that building, everything was turning inward. Eric Dalton, I heard, was fighting to stay relevant. He tried to push a rushed rollout of a half-built analytics tool, something to prove they were still innovative. It crashed in testing. Someone leaked a clip to me, his voice shaking, trying to assign fault, while engineers sat stone-faced, exhausted. Travis Nolan, the HR manager who once told me to be a team player, launched a new wellness initiative. And so it felt as if anonymous surveys, mental health days, all surface-level tactics to patch a culture that was fundamentally broken. One post stood out, a Glassdoor review simply titled, "We Let Her Leave." Short, brutal, honest. It wasn't about me. It was about what I represented. A turning point they ignored. That's when I knew whispers were becoming panic, and panic wasn't emotional, it was strategic. Connor, I learned, had reached out to Nia Chen, my current CEO. Quietly, discreetly, wanted to open a dialogue. Nia, sent me the message with one line. Your past wants a seat at our table. I declined. Not with rage, not with vengeance, just with precision. Let them earn their way back through the front door like everyone else, I told her. She agreed. We moved on because the point of all this wasn't to burn bridges. It was to build something so high they couldn't reach it, even if they tried. Whispers and panic are signs of rot, and rot spreads fastest in silence. But I didn't need to make noise. My work was already speaking for me. And as we prepped for the next launch, I looked out over my team, people who didn't fear innovation, who weren't threatened by strength. And I knew this wasn't the end of my revenge. It was the foundation of a future built without apology. They didn't know I'd be in the room. That was the real twist. The board, the execs, my former bosses, none of them expected to walk into a high-stakes pitch and find the very woman they once tried to erase sitting across from them with the winning bid already in her hand. It was poetic, really. The client was a major financial platform looking for a long-term innovation partner. Legacy firms like my old company had the inside track, but our startup had grown sharp, nimble, and laser-focused. We made the shortlist not through politics, but through numbers. Our performance metrics beat the industry average by 38% in under 9 months. Still, I could see it in their eyes when they saw me. Shock, panic. Then that desperate calculation. Can we pivot? Can we recover? Can we pretend this isn't happening? I didn't flinch. Nia, my current CEO, had insisted I lead the pitch, not for drama, but because I knew the terrain. I knew what this client feared, needed, and dreamed of, and I had lived through the consequences of what didn't work. I opened with results, not revenge. But make no mistake, every slide I showed, every metric I unpacked, every visionary leap I outlined, it was a direct contradiction to everything they once told me I wasn't good enough to do. At one point, Connor Briggs asked a question, soft-spoken, controlled. What makes your approach more scalable than traditional solutions? He tried to keep it clinical, but I knew the subtext. What makes you better than us? I looked him straight in the eye and answered like I was speaking to the entire room. Because we build systems that don't just handle scale, they evolve with it. We don't protect the status quo, we replace it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The room was dead silent. When it ended, the decision didn't come down to feelings, it came down to vision. And ours was clearer, faster, more fearless. We won the contract within 72 hours. Our solution outperformed theirs in 5 of 6 categories. It wasn't even close. That win was more than a number. It was a mirror for them to look into, for me to walk past. 1 week later, I got an email from an old teammate. You were always the future. They just couldn't handle it. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because in that boardroom, when the deck closed and the client extended their hand to me first, I didn't just win a deal. I reclaimed the story and I rewrote it on my terms. They found out not from a press release or an announcement, but from a line buried deep in the final contract. Lead strategist, Mia Carter. That name hit like a seismic crack through the marble floor of their false security. The woman they once discarded had just architected their professional humiliation. And I never had to say a word. The whispers started internally from staffers who caught the scent of the shift, who connected the dots between the lost bid and the strange hush blanketing leadership. Then came the LinkedIn posts, subtle at first, a reshared congratulatory message from Nia, a quiet, thrilled to be part of something bold and future-facing from Jasmine Lynn. And then the picture. Tamika, Jasmine, and I standing in front of our glass-walled innovation lab in Austin, arms folded under the company banner. No caption needed. The image traveled fast. Someone even screenshotted it and posted in the old company Slack. Is that Mia? That's when the facade began to crack. Eric Dalton, once so smug in his position, had to hold an emergency team meeting to spin the narrative. We're shifting our focus, he claimed, toward internal restructuring, more agile models. But the truth was evident. Their biggest client had chosen the woman they tried to erase. Connor Briggs, silent as always, said nothing publicly, but his absence from the quarterly town hall spoke louder than any apology ever could. As for Travis Nolan, HR's enabler-in-chief, he sent me an email, one line, impressive work. I didn't respond. He had his chance to act with integrity. Instead, he chose safety. And now, safety had turned to silence. But the real reveal wasn't mine. It was theirs. Their culture, so polished on the surface, was exposed for what it was, brittle, defensive, and slow. Meanwhile, ours thrived in boldness. The reveal wasn't just about a name and a contract. It was about a new architecture of power, a story where the underestimated outbuilt the established, where silence didn't mean surrender, it meant strategy, where the best revenge didn't look like retaliation, it looked like evolution. The public never saw me gloat. I never dragged them, never needed to. What I built spoke louder than any accusation, and that's the part they couldn't erase. I became the ghost in their machine. Proof that what they tried to suppress didn't die. It scaled quietly, brilliantly, unapologetically. He showed up unannounced at our Austin office, wearing the same smug smirk he'd used to dismiss me, but now it looked warped, like a mask cracking under heat. I was just in the area, Eric said, eyes darting around the lobby. He wasn't visiting. He was begging. Desperation isn't always loud. Sometimes it's neatly pressed into a blazer, hidden behind hollow compliments, cloaked in collaboration opportunities. Eric tried to reframe the past, call it a misunderstanding, suggest we all grew from the experience. I let him talk. It was the same voice that once patronized me in meetings, the same tone that questioned my credentials. Now it wobbled under the weight of his own miscalculation. He asked if we were open to subcontracting, if maybe there was a way our teams could realign. Behind his words was fear, pure and naked. The team was solid. I just had to figure out how to subcontract. Their board had questions. Investors had concerns. Clients were whispering that perhaps the old firm wasn't as innovative as it claimed. Meanwhile, our name was being floated on every shortlist. I told him I'd have Nia take a look, though we were currently focused on more progressive partnerships. That was my version of kindness. Days later, I got another email. This time from Travis Nolan. Longer, apologetic. He referenced lessons learned and culture shifts and said that people like me pushed the industry forward. I didn't respond. Then came Nick Harmon, the same man who once undermined my ideas and rebranded them as his own, was now requesting a coffee meeting. Big fan of what you're doing, he wrote. Would love to hear if there's any space for someone with my background. I stared at the message for a full minute before archiving it. What these men didn't understand, what they still couldn't grasp, was that I hadn't just left. I had redesigned the game. Their desperation wasn't about me. It was about the gaping void I had left behind. They thought I'd disappear after their campaign. Instead, I became the one they now had to chase. But I never turned around. Desperation reveals more than failure. It reveals what people truly value when the mask slips. For Eric, it was control. For Travis, reputation. For Nick, access. None of them truly respected what I brought. They just regretted the cost of pushing it away. By then, we were in talks for another major account, bigger than the last. Naya had looped me in early. Jasmine was already working on the deck. Tamika was designing the UX wireframes. We had momentum, we had alignment, and most of all, we had clarity. The desperation knocking on our doors didn't shake us. It reminded us of everything we never wanted to return to. Every groveling message, every nervous pitch from the very people who once tried to break me. That was the final confirmation. They were no longer my obstacle. They were my proof. I didn't burn their house down. I just built mine taller, stronger, and with a spotlight so bright it cast their failures into shadow. While they scrambled for relevance, we became the standard. And I never once looked back. That was the plan all along. Not vengeance, replacement. Redirection isn't revenge, it's elevation. While they were stuck trying to reclaim an image, I was sculpting a new reality. Every pitch, every win, every strategic hire was deliberate. We didn't just grow, we engineered legacy. The goal was never to compete with them, it was to make them irrelevant. That's the part they never saw coming. See, when they tried to box me out, they underestimated the silence I walked away with. They thought silence was surrender. But silence gave me distance. And from that distance, I saw angles, watched the market shift. I saw what clients truly wanted but couldn't find in firms like theirs. Transparency, agility, accountability. While their leadership posted tone-deaf victory laps on LinkedIn, we embedded ourselves in real conversations. When they recycled old playbooks, we rewrote the rules entirely. Nia led a data transparency initiative that drew press coverage. Tamika streamlined onboarding so cleanly that our retention rate became a benchmark. I focused on one thing, being undeniable. The product, flawless. The process, precise. The people, empowered. We didn't pitch clients. They came to us. We became the quiet disruptors, not loud rebels. And then came the tipping point, a multi-million-dollar contract, the same one Eric's firm was banking on to stabilize their books. We knew they were finalists. So were we. Only difference? We didn't need it. They did. During the final presentation, I watched Eric fumble through buzzwords while our deck opened with a live dashboard demonstrating results before the client even asked for them. Our strategy was leaner, smarter, and faster. And I never said his name once. That's the brilliance of redirection. It looks like you're moving on until they realize you've replaced them at the table and not with noise, with results. A week later, we got the call. The client chose us. Eric's firm released a vague PR statement about realignment. Internally, I heard they were downsizing. The irony? Some of the very people who signed that petition years ago were now being let go. I didn't celebrate it. That's not who I am. But I noted it quietly as a reminder of how ecosystems shift when power is redirected with precision. I never tried to destroy them. That would have made me just another angry voice. I redirected the narrative. I became the answer to a question they didn't know how to ask. And now I was the name on everyone's tongue, not for drama, but for delivery. That's the kind of revenge that doesn't scream, it echoes. We didn't build a firm. We built a movement. One that made the old way look outdated. And when people asked how it all started, I never mentioned the petition. I just smiled because redirection isn't loud. It's lasting. And when done right, it turns silence into the loudest statement of all. They tried to write me off like a bad headline. Short, forgettable, and brushed aside. But I didn't just survive the smear. I turned it into a blueprint. Now, Their names are forgotten, and mine is printed on contracts, keynote stages, and whispered in boardrooms they'll never enter again. Legacy doesn't begin when the dust settles. It begins when you choose not to settle at all. After the deal that shifted the tide, I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The numbers spoke. The culture spoke. Our retention rate, the industry buzz, the invitations to panels where people actually listened. It was all motion, forward and fast. And I made one decision that changed everything. I opened the door to those who'd been locked out for too long. Not the polished insiders with practiced smirks, but the hungry, the overlooked, the brilliant ones who'd been dismissed just like I had been. Tamika, who once feared her voice in rooms filled with men who interrupted her mid-sentence, was now running national strategy. Zeke, passed over for promotion 3 times at his last firm, became our client success lead, and under his leadership, not a single contract had been lost. What we were building wasn't just a company, it was a correction. Not just for me, but for every underdog with talent but no leverage. And that scared the old guard. I started noticing subtle jabs in trade magazines, anonymous quotes, dismissive comments like flavor of the month or too idealistic. They were losing relevance and they knew it. But I didn't waste time reacting. I was building, growing, cementing. I launched a mentorship program, quietly, no press release, no performative social media, just a network of real support for women of color in tech. Within a year, it had matched over 300 mentees with experienced advisors. I funded scholarships in my mother's name. I sponsored kids from my old neighborhood into coding boot camps. It wasn't charity, it was infrastructure, a legacy that couldn't be taken from me because it wasn't just about me. People began to notice, not just clients, but competitors. I received an anonymous message one night through a mutual contact. It was one of the former petition signers. She was reconsidering her career direction and hoped I'd be open to a conversation. I paused before replying, not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted clarity. I responded with a line that I'd written years earlier but never used. Redemption begins with accountability. She never wrote back, and that was okay. Some stories don't need sequels. The legacy I cared about was already unfolding. I watched my team operate like a force, confident, kind, strategic. They didn't just follow orders. They made waves. And at our annual retreat, while standing in front of a team that now numbered over 200, I took a quiet breath and realized this was it. Not the moment they clapped, not the success metrics, but the invisible thread connecting every chapter of this journey. From the moment I signed my name at the bottom of that severance agreement to the day we inked a deal that would shift the industry's center of gravity, I had been moving strategically, purposefully. That's what legacy really is. Not the echo of applause, but the architecture of movement, something others can walk through, expand, and improve. And when people ask me now how I did it, how I turned betrayal into momentum, I don't mention the petition. I tell them about the silence, about how powerful it is to redirect pain into purpose, about how success isn't the end of revenge, but the continuation of belief. Belief in what you build, who you build it with, and why. Because long after the noise fades, motion continues. Legacy continues. And now it's theirs to carry forward. They didn't just underestimate me, they erased me. Collectively signed their names to it like I was a smudge on their clean, curated company culture. But what they failed to realize is that some stains don't disappear. They transform, evolve, and leave permanent marks on everything that tried to wash them away. So here's the final word, not for them, but for anyone who's ever been ambushed under the guise of professionalism. I don't need to recount the betrayal again. The scars did that for years. What matters more is what I did after I stopped licking my wounds. I studied them. I understood every layer of doubt, every condescending smirk, every lie masked as concern. Then I built something even sharper than their cruelty. Clarity. Clarity that I didn't owe anyone normalcy just because they were uncomfortable with brilliance that didn't look like them. In that clarity, I found discipline. Not the kind you learn in corporate leadership retreats, but the kind you earn through silence, restraint, and purposeful redirection. I didn't scream when I left. I didn't blast them online. I didn't turn bitterness into a brand. I turned it into a blueprint. Some people think revenge is loud. It's not. It's calculated, quiet, almost surgical. Mine came dressed in numbers, strategy, and 100 silent wins they didn't even know I was collecting. And when the tipping point came, when I could have dragged them publicly or shut them down, I chose something colder and far more lasting. I left them behind, not because I'm forgiving, but because I'm finished. And there's a difference. Forgiveness is often confused with weakness, but finishing something, that's power. That's control. That's legacy. I once read that rage, when focused, becomes a kind of gravity, pulling everything toward its center. My rage pulled me through sleepless nights, through imposter syndrome, through endless meetings where I had to explain what should have been obvious. It pulled me through every silent judgment, every snide laugh when I left the room, every side eye when I walked in. And now, that gravity pulls others in, young professionals who are tired of pretending, women of color with sharpened instincts and ideas no one knows how to manage. People like me and unlike me who've been sidelined not because they lack talent, but because they made the wrong people nervous. That's who I speak to now. Not with words, but with motion, with infrastructure, with results. If I had the chance to go back, would I try to avoid what happened? Not anymore, because everything I am now was forged in that fire. Not because of it, but through it. I didn't let their hate make me harder. I let it make me smarter. I didn't need their validation to matter. I needed to matter to myself. And I do, fully, quietly, powerfully. And if you're sitting there somewhere between rage and exhaustion, somewhere between knowing your worth and watching others diminish it, let this be your signal. You don't need to scream. You don't need to fight them on their turf. You just need to move, redirect, rebuild. You don't owe them the sound of your pain. You owe yourself the architecture of your future, one built without their approval, one so solid, so undeniable that even their silence becomes your evidence. You were never the problem. You were always the possibility they couldn't control. And now you write the ending, no permission needed. Sometimes they don't break you, they build your exit strategy. You don't always realize the moment your dignity is being auctioned off, but one day you wake up and realize they've been slicing off pieces of your self-worth just to keep their system fed. And suddenly you're either the meal or the one who flips the table. That's what this story reminds us. Revenge doesn't have to be loud, dramatic, or even openly recognized to be powerful. Mia didn't burn the house down. She built a new one across the street with better lighting, stronger walls, and no room for backstabbers pretending to be mentors. The pain she endured wasn't an ending. It was a pivot. And for a lot of Americans, especially women, people of color, and anyone who's been overlooked despite overachieving, that's more than just relatable. It's the blueprint. What Mia teaches us is the art of silent redirection. In a world obsessed with clapping back, viral call-outs, and public cancellation, There's an underestimated power in not giving your energy to what's already broken. She could have chosen scorched earth, but instead, she chose strategic separation. That's not weakness, that's control. And there's a lesson in that for anyone sitting in a job where your ideas are praised until you claim them, where your leadership is tolerated only in silence, where promotions seem allergic to your name. You're not crazy. You're not too much. You're probably the right one in the wrong room. Here's what you can take from Mia's journey. Let rage be your data, not your brand. It's okay to be angry, but let it guide your decisions, not sabotage them. Don't waste precision on people committed to misunderstanding you. Not every injustice deserves a full reply. Some just need a redirect. Build in the shadows. You don't owe the world updates. Let your impact speak when it's ready. Success isn't always about being seen. It's about being unshakable. There's a moment in every professional's life, especially in America's competitive, often biased corporate culture, where you realize you're not losing because you're inadequate. You're losing because your presence threatens someone who never intended to share power. Mia's choice to walk, to wait, and then to strike back with substance is a masterclass in restraint and vision. It's not just a story about revenge. It's a story about reclaiming authorship of your own life. She didn't ask to be wrong, but once she was, she turned it into raw material, not for retaliation, but for reinvention. She didn't need to defeat them to win. She just had to outgrow them. So if you're watching this and feel the sting of familiarity, if you've been betrayed by people who smiled while stealing credit, if you've had to shrink just to survive in a place that demands your silence, know this. You don't have to stay there, and you don't have to shout. You just have to move. Because the loudest statement sometimes isn't your voice, it's your absence. Sometimes forgiveness is self-liberation, but sometimes silence is the sharpest knife. And the world will always try to shame you for taking back your power quietly. Let them. You've got better places to be. How to get started today. 1, write down what you've been tolerating. Be honest. What behaviors, patterns, or environments have slowly chipped away at you. 2, list your hidden wins. What have you done that's gone unrecognized, undervalued, or even stolen? Celebrate them privately. That's your raw proof. 3, start your exit blueprint. This might mean learning a new skill, reaching out to mentors, or even saving a little each paycheck. The small moves, big freedom. 4, detach emotionally from people who gaslight your growth. Silence can be a boundary. Not everyone deserves your rebuttal. 5, find one quiet ally, someone who sees you. No more suffering alone. If this story lit something in you, drop a comment. Share your moment. Subscribe if you want more stories that see you. And send this to someone who's still in the storm, because sometimes the most powerful revenge is just finally moving forward.